I'm someone that deals a lot with dialogue. I deal a lot with language. I'm a writer. I read so much material. I process a lot of information. I work with ideas. I don't get so much time away from the conceptual, from the linguistic frameworks that occupy a lot of my mental activity. That's a really elaborate way of saying that I get caught up in my mind a lot of time, and sometimes it's really productive and it's really creative and it's really skillful. Other times it's unskilled and it's something that causes me to not be present. So these past few days or a week or so, I've really doubled down on essentially mindfulness, right? Paying a lot of attention to each moment, to each breath, to the way in which the mind creates separation. And in this video, I want to talk about the ways in which the mind not only creates separation, but creates a conceptual framework at any given moment in time. And how when your awareness expands, you start to get to deeper and deeper levels of mind. You get to really delve into the foundation, the structure of the mental framework, the conceptual framework that we apply to the world. And what I do want to say, and what I want to be clear about, is that most of us, most of the time, believe that we're present. Now, I'm writing an article at the moment on mindfulness. And Ellen Langer, who spent 40 years researching mindfulness in more of a secular Western framework, she's uncovered this, right? She's found that although, I think there was a 2010 study saying that we spend over 46% of the time occupied by mind, with our mind wandering, we're not present, right? Ellen Langer discovered that most people believe that they're present most of the time. The thing is, we often feel that way when we don't have awareness, and such is the nature of mind. It deceives us and it tricks us in a multitude of ways. And one of those is when a storyline is really convincing. And I talk a lot about noticing storylines, right? And in a way, that doesn't do justice to what this process is, because noticing a storyline, actually that is the moment, that's the moment that you capture, that you're caught in mental activity. And by that I mean, you might be on a walk and you're in nature and you're walking past the trees, the sun's shining, it's a beautiful day. But actually in your mind you're thinking about what you're doing later on that day. You're not aware in that moment that you're distracted by thinking. You're caught up in the process of, I'm gonna write this article, I'm gonna eat this for lunch, X, Y, Z. Like, these are all things that you've likely heard before if you've taken any time to explore mindfulness. But what I'm trying to point to is that with self-awareness comes more awareness to the multitude and the layers of mental activity. So on a very high level, we could say on like a kind of frantic, obvious level, there are like the self-critical thoughts that if you're in a really distressed state, you might catch yourself having a kind of self-dialogue and a self-commentary, right? These are the thoughts that are most habitual at times. If you have something like anxiety, they're also fairly easy to catch when you start being mindful, because they're intrusive, they're there, you're like aware of them. But if you imagine that as like the tip of the iceberg, and that the deeper you go down, the more you realize there's subtler and subtler levels of mental activity that create a reality that isn't the direct experience of reality. We live not only almost half the time mind wandering, even when we feel that we're present, we're living in a reality of mental construction. Now, I don't mean this, it's not like we're all psychotic, although to some degree we are, because we see the world, like I'm wearing my glasses, right? And quite a common metaphor for this is like, if direct experience, if pure awareness of reality, free from all mental activity, is as I'm seeing now, which it absolutely isn't, I can't really see anything, we have our lenses that we put on, and it's the way in which we see the world. And most of the time, this is so ingrained, it's so habitual, it's either culturally or genetically or inherently just instilled in us, so much so that these processes are so subtle and so far away from our general waking consciousness that we don't even question them. And I'm talking about the labeling mechanisms that we have. We instinctively label, and I would highly recommend Ellen Langer's book, right, that goes into this. We label everything all the time. It's like we just have this constant stream of labeling and discernment in our minds. And it's not like we're looking at stuff and we're like, oh, I'm labeling that as a tree, or I'm labeling that as a bookcase, or I'm labeling that as another person. We just do it so instinctually that this mental framework, this conceptual reality is superimposed over our direct experience, is superimposed over our sensory experience. And the thing is, if we think of, and just to put it in really rudimentary terms, right? Let's say you've got 100%, you've got like a 100% attention. And this isn't the way it is embodied, but let's say you have 100% attention. And that every percentage you assign somewhere else takes away, so you only have a set amount of attention. If you walk down the street and you're on your phone, for example, let's say you're giving 70% of your attention to the screen on your phone, all of a sudden, all the data, all the information, all the phenomena around you is reduced by 30%, sorry, not by 30%, it's reduced to 30% of what you would usually perceive. Now, that's an obvious example, but not only that, when you look at your phone, you're kind of, I picture a seabed that you prod, right? And then all this kind of settlement comes up. It's like every time we enact something, we kind of create more settlement and more mental activity in our lives, right? And like a really good example, I've been, as part of this experiment, because I've really been reconnecting to this really beautiful state of presence, one that feels timeless, one that feels easy. And one of the things that I've done to assist in that is just to not wear my watch. Because I'm someone, like I have the propensity to be like, what am I doing now? What am I doing now? What am I doing now? And this is just a stream, right? It's a narrative. It becomes a stream, it becomes a narrative. What am I doing now? What am I doing next? And I'm living in reality, but I have like a mental checklist, like a segmentation going on in my mind. And I'm playing with that reality as I'm living reality. And the great illusion of time is that every time I look at my watch, I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's 3 p.m. now. So that means I've got 10 minutes to do X, Y, Z. As we all know, the experience, the actual direct experience of time is subjective, right? It changes. It's never like, no one can say what an hour actually feels like because this changes depending on the circumstance, right? Einstein pointed to this very clearly and very aptly. But point being, because I'm streaming and possibly not making sense, is that we think we're present when we're not present. We're actually viewing reality through a framework. It's almost like a virtual reality of mental activity. And our attention is limited. So if we walk down the street and we're caught up in planning what we're going to have for dinner, we're not as aware of the data around us. You know, whatever is in mind, and again, to be rudimentary with it, let's say your mental activity, that you don't have a meditation practice. Let's just say Ricky at the age of 20, you know, lots of anxiety, so much mental activity that I would live my mind in any given moment because I would be constantly self-referentiating. Is that even a word? I'd be walking down the street and it would not be the direct experience of the street. It would be all the thoughts linked to that, all the labels and all the judgments that are linked to that. Is that person looking at me? Am I running late? You know, this mental virtual reality, the conceptual framework is being responded to. However, It doesn't have to be that way. And through mindfulness and through a practice of concentration and learning how to quieten the mind and still the mind, then the mental activity starts to reduce. So the mental activity starts to reduce, and let's say you go from a 70 to a 20. And when you're at 20% activity, that's when you're like really, you feel really connected, you're at ease, you're not really thinking so much. And then things appear a little bit brighter because you've got more attention, you've got more capacity to take in your sensory experience. All of a sudden, the world becomes more alive. But anyone who's taken psychedelics knows that if you go even deeper than that, if you go beyond the real deeply ingrained neural networks of reality into direct experience, then a whole new world appears. It's one beyond language, it's one beyond the conceptual framework, and it is one that is fully enchanted and incomprehensible, at least to the state of the conceptual framework. Because when you see something fully and truly without a label, without creating a mental construct as you see and as you perceive in this kind of feedback loop, it's like infinite feedback loop, right, of projection and perception, then what we see becomes richer and richer and clearer, and we notice the tiny details and we notice the subtleties. Food tastes better. We're able to better connect to other people. Things seem luminous and vibrant. And it's as if we can really pay attention to the moment, that's where reality is. Like there's a different dimension at play because we're so used to living in the virtual reality, one layer of the virtual reality. If you ever experience timelessness, that's an experience of the numbing, or at least the extinguishing of the mental model of time, right? So the point being with this is learning to become truly present and aware of all the thinking processes involves not being caught up in those thinking processes that are very subtle and cunning in the way that they distract you. But if you're able to constantly return to the moment, then a richer reality presents itself. And in experiencing that reality, then you begin to build even more momentum and more determination to make sure, it's just, it is the difference between not quite this, right, seeing without my glasses and seeing with them, but it is impossible to describe. So I encourage you to explore this, to really pay attention. If you have a meditation practice, if you're mindful of your day to day, to just spend time really just try and notice, just bring your attention to the amount of mental activity that is there, right? If you feel like you're present in any moment where you're like, yeah, I'm present right now, close your eyes and focus on your breath for 5 minutes without a single thought. Anytime you have a thought, you're moving slightly farther away from reality. And I mean that as in the direct experiential reality. We're living in a world that is conceptual mostly. Without a conceptual world, we would not be living in the way that we are. We live because we assign value to concepts. So our minds are constantly stimulated in this way. But if you can learn to transcend that, then you can really join the moment, then you can join the dance of life. And that is something that is, it's one of the best things you can experience. So I really encourage you to practice this and let me know how you get on and let me know what you notice and if there are any other questions that you have related to this topic.